Hello, everybody. I'm Steve. I'm here today with author Mike Thorn. Mike, thanks for joining us. It's great that you decided to come by and chat.
Thanks so much for having me, man.
Yeah. So, for anyone who may not be familiar with your work, what kind of books do you write, and what do you enjoy doing?
I write horror fiction. So my two books that have been released to date are Shelter for the Damned, which is my debut novel. It's a coming of age cosmic horror novel, and Darkest Hours, a collection of short stories, which is being re-released by Journal Stone on June 11th. And the new edition has author notes for every story and foreword by Sadie Hartman, aka Mother Horror, and a collection of horror film essays by yours truly. So
Nice.
That's what I do. That's what I like to do. I like to write. I like to read. I like to listen to music.
Mm-hmm.
I like to drink coffee.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Any type of coffee? What type of coffee do you prefer?
When I'm going to the grocery store, the best option is usually Kicking Horse, but I like to get local coffee when I can. There's a place called Hexagon on my street where I get some good beans, so that's a good spot.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Have you ever tried your own beans? Have you ever tried that?
I have not. No, I feel like it would be potentially disastrous. So, like, you just do it in your oven, or what? How do you do it?
I've seen some people do it in those little old-fashioned popcorn makers that the popcorn comes over the little chute. I've seen some people use those to
Wow,
to get their beans ready. Yeah, it's kind of strange.
Maybe one day.
Yeah. So I was curious with Darkest Hours, what made you decide to re-release it with author's notes and with extra goodies?
Well, the contract ended with the original publisher, and when I pitched it, I was just thinking, how can I maximize on this new release? How can I turn it into something new, something exciting? Author notes was one of the first things that came to mind, but then I also thought I've written so much film criticism over time, and it's kind of scattered throughout the internet. And given that Darkest Hours is full of references to horror cinema, and the aesthetic of the original release and this release kind of draw on that, I thought that would be a really kind of intuitive supplementary thing to bring into the book. So Journal Stone was down, and so we went with it. And yeah, I think this is kind of like the definitive version of this book. I'm really happy with it.
I really enjoy the author's notes at the end of each story, and I was surprised, and I appreciated the way that you dealt with certain subjects in the story without being too in your face or batting someone over the head with it. They're really subtle, all the notes in the story. So I thought that was pretty well done. It wasn't over the top. It wasn't, it was just enough to where you got your message across, but it wasn't too in your face to where it was being too forceful.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm kind of allergic to overly didactic art, regardless of the format. So I, as a writer, therefore, never seek out to write a message story. That kind of fiction just doesn't appeal to me personally. Granted, I do think like my ideological and moral fixations probably find their way into the fiction, but I prefer to let that happen organically, and then I can maybe reflect on it in retrospect. But yeah, and Raoul reads.
Yeah, Raoul. Yes, the author's notes connected any dots that I wasn't able to connect myself. Yeah, there was a few. To his point, there was a few that I read the story and I got some of it, and then when I read your notes at the end, it kind of all came together for me. So, because I'm not the brightest crayon on the box, so I need a little bit of help sometimes to get some of it without reading it a few times and getting the hang of it.
Well, thank you. I'm glad you enjoyed that aspect of the re-release.
Yeah, and it's funny because some of those stories that are done subtly like that, they're some of the more frightening stories in the book.
Yeah, and I think that's another thing with horror fiction is often the immediate the most immediate thing to come from a horror story sometimes is just the affect, like the emotional or the sensory experience of reading it. And of course, that's something as a horror author, I'm very happy to strive for that. But usually I am grappling with more than just that. So for instance, a story like Hair, I think elicits probably a visceral response in a lot of readers. But I was also, writing about addiction and the horror of inhabiting a human body, and things like that. So I was hoping the story notes would help maybe bring some of those other ideas to the forefront a little bit.
Yeah. So what draws you to horror? What is it about the genre that you really enjoy, that you like writing? What is it about horror that you love?
I think primarily I came to horror because I've just always been a fan. I consider myself like a student of the genre. It's a genre I feel like there's always more for me to learn from and more for me to explore within. But I think just the unique excesses of the genre allow you to confront very uncomfortable subterranean truths that, in a way that is not as easily accessible in other fiction genres. So I think just by virtue of the way horror is designed, with its imagery, with its affective registers, you can go to very, very, disturbing. You can access disturbing truths, I guess, for lack of a better word.
Yeah, it's a good way to describe it. Do you have short stories are difficult to write, to have the reader engaged in the story, to tell the story in a short amount of time. Do you have any kind of methods that you use, or anything that you do specifically for short stories to get any tools that you may use to get the reader engaged with and still tell the story?
Usually my short stories will begin with something very simple, like an image, a concept maybe, or a character. And what I try to do is explore the origin of that image to its fullest, the trajectory of that character, or the horrific potential within that concept. I draw a little bit on some like narratological theory. I think a lot of people scoff at things like Robert McKee's Story, but that's a book I read for a directed writings seminar during my undergrad, and I found it quite instructive in terms of thinking about the function of every scene. Every scene needs to have a turn in some sense. So just thinking thinking about the utility of every scene, and thinking about I don't even know if you necessarily need to know the destination, maybe roughly have a sense of where the story is going. My process to date has been pretty organic. Like, I don't plan in advance. I might have a vague sense of where it's going, but I'm more of a quote unquote pantser, so to speak.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's planners and there's pantsers, is that right? Is that the terms that are used?
Yeah. Plotters and pantsers, I think.
Plotters,
Yeah.
Yeah. So once you have your idea, do you kind of build around your idea and with your plotting your characters?
Yeah, exactly. So I guess to go back to a story like Hair, that story originated from, I guess, a few dissonant concepts. So I think for many writers, or at least this is the case for me, there'll be maybe a series of things I'm fixated on in a particular moment in my life, maybe as a result of texts I'm reading, or a relationship I'm in, or maybe some resurfaced bad memory or something like that. Hair arose from, originally, I was just interested in that affective reaction, that common affective reaction that people have to finding hair in their food. Something that comes from our bodies when we find it in a place it's not supposed to be. We have this intense reaction of revulsion, and that interested me. So I brought that into my interest in writing a story about addiction through a quasi-omniscient perspective. So you can kind of see the escalation of Theodore's addiction, but you're also kind of submerged in his POV simultaneously. So you see the horror of it, but you also see his inability to see the horror of it. Yeah, and then I was also reading a book at the time called The Thing, A Phenomenology of Horror, which seeks to find a kind of unhuman phenomenology, but the book is interested in, I guess, broadly speaking, the horror of inhabiting a body with a past that we don't recognize. Yeah, so all those things came together and I wrote Hair.
Nice. Yeah. And Raul commented it was gross. Haha.
Thank you, Raul. What a strange field I'm in, where when people say that was disgusting or you horrified me, I say thank you.
That's your job, right? I mean,
That's my job.
Yeah. So, do you have any limits? And Jeremy Fee is here. Hello, Jeremy.
Hey, Jeremy.
Yeah. In terms of writing your stories, are there certain lines you won't cross when you write the stories, or do you ever write something and say, oh, "I went too far. I need to back this up"?
I don't have any specifically in mind. I'm sure there are places I wouldn't want to go because I wouldn't feel comfortable inhabiting certain points of view, or I wouldn't feel justified in inhabiting certain points of view. Mm-hmm. But I don't have any ready-made answer to that question. I do think horror, in terms of content, should elicit discomfort and fear and strong either moral or physical reactions. So I think the job of horror is to disrupt and maybe to call attention to things we'd rather not look at. So to my mind, self-censorship is something that is best kept out of the genre. Having said that, I would never write a story promoting, views or beliefs that I find repellent. I would never write a story promoting racism or sexism or homophobia or something, because those are things I find repellent. Right. But there's no saying I wouldn't write a character who holds those beliefs. But I would make it clear that I'm not endorsing those views.
Sure.
Yeah.
And James is here. He says hello. Hello, James.
Hi, James.
So when you develop your characters, do you ever develop them around people that you know or people you've met? Do you model them around people, whether it's in a good or bad way?
Not as transparently as that. I think most of my characters are amalgams. Most of my characters have some piece of me in them somewhere, because after all, they came from my brain. There are definitely also fragments of people I've known or people I've heard about, maybe stories I heard growing up, or stories I hear on the train, or stories I read in the news. So it kind of comes from everywhere. Yeah, I've never written a character that's modeled explicitly after one person I've known.
And Mazza Booktuber's here. He says, hey guys, can't wait to read this.
Thank you, Mazza. I hope you dig it.
Yeah. And you mentioned hearing stories you've heard. I'm always curious with, especially horror writers, if they've experienced any paranormal, if they've had any paranormal experiences that they've drawn on for their writing. Have you experienced anything you personally, or heard any stories that really got to you?
I have, yeah. Actually, I just did an interview with my friend Maddie recently. She runs a really cool channel on alternative spirituality and witchcraft and stuff like that. Her and I have been batting around the idea of me coming back just to exchange our personal paranormal experience stories with each other. But I had, I'm pretty sure, a poltergeist in this apartment for quite a while. There hasn't been any activity for a while, but there were just so many different bizarre happenings that occurred over a span of time that I couldn't really explain it away. One of them that I didn't talk about in that previous interview is one morning when I woke up, the key to my apartment was bent at like a 90-degree angle. And I could not do this with, if I used 150% of my strength. People will often ask me, were you drunk the night before? The answer to that is no. And even if I was drunk, I don't turn into the Hulk when I'm drunk. So I had to bring it to a key place, and they had to use like a special vise to bend it back, and it's still slightly bent because it was so. But yeah, things smashing flying off the walls. There was just a lot of really wild activity. And there was one occasion where my ex and her friend were both there when we had some Christmas lights over the archway to our kitchen, and they just turned themselves on. And there were 3 of us witnessing this. So I had a poltergeist, yes.
Yeah. And my friend Elizabeth Sagewood is here. She says, hey guys, I'm actually on one of these live shows for once. Mike, I love Darkest Hours. Review is coming soon.
Thanks so much, Elizabeth. I appreciate it.
And Raul mentioned, is there any stories that you felt was too much and had to dial it down? I think kind of touched on that a second ago about things you would try and stay away from.
Yeah, I mean, there was one story, I guess, in the original manuscript of Darkest Hours that I submitted, and the editor said he wanted to publish the book, but that particular story he didn't want to include. And in retrospect, I'm very glad he made that call, because I think the ideological angle of the story was a little too muddy. And now I'm very glad it hasn't seen the light of day. But I tend to try to avoid self-censoring. If I'm feeling uncomfortable as I'm venturing into a story, my natural instinct is to lean further into that. I believe that's my duty as a horror writer, is to look at the things I don't want to look at, the things that make me uncomfortable. So no, if anything, I try to dial it up. If I'm rewriting a story, I'll think, how do I make this more effective, more intense? So.
And our friend Epic Tales is here. He's in the building.
What's up, Epic Tales?
Yeah. So that's interesting about the strange happenings in your apartment. What made them go away, or are they just do you have periods of time between that you experience things?
I actually think it was tied to my ex, because when she moved out, it stopped. And her family had a number of paranormal experiences in their home when she was growing up. And she used to work at a bakery, and she would often hear whistling when she was alone in the bakery. And a couple times we heard whistling when she was here. So I think it was like attached to her.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. And nothing since she left, nothing at all.
Wow.
So I don't know. Make of that what you will.
Yeah.
I don't know.
And Epic Tales says, I've heard so many good things about Darkest Hours.
Oh, I'm happy to hear that, Epic Tales. Thank you.
And it is available for pre-order now. And I've noticed that, especially in your author notes at the end of each story, you mentioned a lot of your inspirations and a lot of your ideas came from horror movies that you watched in the past. Have you ever considered going into the movie industry to participate in that part of it?
Yeah, for sure. I've been in regular conversation with my good friend Jamie Blanks. He directed Urban Legend and Valentine, and 2 great Australian films, Storm Warning and Long Weekend. He and I are batting around several ideas at all times, and we're looking at getting something going. So I'm a massive fan of Jamie. I mean, Urban Legend is a classic. I have an Urban Legend t-shirt. So when I connected with this guy, I was very flattered and humbled and excited. So yeah, we're looking to develop something together. So fingers crossed for that.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe you mentioned on social media that you are writing an adaptation for Shelter of the Damned. Is that right?
Yeah, I've completed a treatment for it, and the goal is for me to write the screenplay as well. That was a really interesting process because that novel is so deeply interior. So to think about it in cinematic terms, which are mostly visual, was a really fun and interesting challenge. And Jamie and I batted that back and forth for a while, and he gave me some really useful ideas too. So yeah, I'm hoping that one sees the light of day. That's the goal.
Yeah. What was the biggest challenge in converting that from a book to a screenplay? What are the big points that you have to change to convert it over to something that would be developed into a movie or a TV show?
I mean, the main thing is that in the book, you are very much inside Mark's head, the protagonist Mark's head. and he's a very disturbed character. And you, if the book works, I think you get a sense of the conflict and the turmoil inside of him. And to translate that to cinema requires a different set of tools. So you find visual cues and dialogue as a means of expressing those things, because you don't, I mean, I didn't want to use voiceover or something like that. I think that can work in some contexts, but in this particular case, it didn't seem to me like the right way to go about it. So that would probably be the biggest challenge with that particular book.
So speaking of movies, you mentioned, I believe it was some of your author notes, that you used to work in a video store way back. Do you miss those days of having to go into a video store and get the movie off the shelf and get it that way? Or do you enjoy the convenience that we have now of just typing in a movie and most times just at our fingertips?
Oh, I definitely miss those days. Yeah. I think, like, you know, in order to get the selection that you would have at a video store, you need to be signed up to like 10 streaming services. You know, if you look at some of the biggest streaming services like Netflix, they have very few films that were released before like 1990. So if you're interested in world cinema or classic cinema, you really have to do some digging on a number of different streaming sites. And just the experience of being in a video store is something I loved. And when I worked there, I got 10 free rentals a week. So I would just devour movies. I would 10. It was a great job. I loved it.
We used to, you know, every weekend we used to go to the store, to the rental place, and go search for the movie we wanted to watch. And, you know, you had to go and dig for it, and people, you know, they were scattered everywhere. I used to hate it. And now looking back, it was kind of fun, that experience of going in there, and often, you know, you'd even find movies that you didn't plan on watching, then you just picked up because that's all that was left. You ended up enjoying it.
Yes, absolutely.
So Epic had a question. How much creative control do you have in the adaptation? Good question.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm the one writing the treatment. I would be the one writing the script. And Jamie, you know, is very, very respectful of the source and wants to give me a lot of creative freedom with it. But I'm also, you know, I deeply respect him and trust him. So any feedback he gives me, I'm like totally receptive to. But yeah, no, I mean, to this point, I had pretty much full freedom.
Yeah. Is that strange to give up control of your story like that? Is that even though you trust him and you value his feedback, is that strange to kind of give that control over to someone else?
I mean, so far I've only written the treatment, but you know, if he were to move ahead with it, I think, you know, he would be, it sounds like he would want me involved as much as possible. So I think it would just be exciting. I don't in this particular case, I don't have any concerns on that front at all.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah.
I guess, yeah, it helps that you're familiar with him and you have good relationship. So
yes, for sure. Yeah.
Are there any movies that have really inspired you or really stuck with you over the years that you've watched and you still go back to them and reference them, or just even go back and watch them just for fun, that really hit home for you?
Yeah, I mean, there are so many. Like I guess I'll stick within the horror genre. I'm a huge fan of 1930s horror cinema in particular. So like the Bela Lugosi and Boris Karloff cycle, especially. I love also the golden age of the 70s and 80s. So Tobe Hooper, George A. Romero, John Carpenter, Wes Craven, all of those people, I go back and study their films very closely. In terms of contemporary filmmakers, I'm really excited by and inspired by the work that people like Rob Zombie and Kiyoshi Kurosawa are doing. Of course, the aforementioned Jamie Blanks too. Yeah, so many. I'm sure I'm forgetting stuff. I also love the Vincent Price stuff from the 60s, especially his collaborations with Roger Corman. But yeah, I watch all kinds of film. I live and breathe movies. That's kind of my lifeblood. So definitely.
Yeah. Have you ever considered writing into another genre, or you ever thought about it, or even started developing ideas for one?
Yeah, I mean, I started when I guess early in my undergrad, I wrote a lot of what I would deem now to be kind of bad poetry, but that was how I started exploring creative writing as an adult. Um, and it was dark stuff and kind of designed to elicit shock, but I wouldn't say a lot of it was horror. Some of it was horror poetry.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, and I'd write anything if the muse and the inspiration struck me. But I'm also happy to stay in the horror genre. Horror feels like home to me, and I feel like it's boundless in terms of what you can do with it. But yeah, totally. If the time and the inspiration came, I would absolutely write outside of the genre.
Yeah. And Epic Tales has a question that I was just actually thinking as you were talking. What do you think of grimdark or like dark fantasy? I think he
Mhm.
would do amazing stuff. Yeah, I was wondering that too as you were talking. Have you looked into a genre like grimdark or like a dark fantasy type of genre?
What would be some examples of grimdark?
I think something like the First Law trilogy would probably be on the lighter side of grimdark, but maybe the Prince of Thorns books, or Ash and Sand, or like Priest of Bones, those type of books.
Haven't read any of those. I mean, would some of Clive Barker's work count as grimdark? I don't know.
Mm, maybe, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I don't. I actually don't know a lot about that world. Maybe Epic Tales can give me some recommendations. Sounds cool, but yeah, I haven't. I don't think I've, to my knowledge, I don't know if I've read anything within that world. It sounds interesting though.
Yeah, we'll have to get a list together for you and
Cool.
suggest some books.
I'd love that.
Yeah. So, when did you decide you wanted to be a writer? What was it that convinced you that's what you wanted to do?
I think it was just some pathological distortion that I was born with. I've always, as a kid, I would draw monsters and I would draw, things inspired by fantasy and sci-fi movies and books. Um, and I wrote stories since as long as I can remember too. It's just something I've always had a predisposal to do. So I don't even know if I feel like it's a choice that I made. I chose to start submitting in my mid 20s once I felt like I had work that was worth submitting. But in terms of writing, it's just something I've always done, and that probably stems from my love of reading. I've always read. My parents always encouraged reading. Um, so, discovering like J.R.R. Tolkien and C.S. Lewis as a kid really inspired me, and R.L. Stein. And then around the age of 12, when I first met Stephen King through Pet Cemetery, that was a game-changing moment. And ditto for when I first encountered Hubert Selby Jr. in my teens. Like all of those things, I think led to me feeling like, oh, okay, I feel like this is something I could explore more seriously.
Hmm. And Rollo commented it's a very gory genre. So yeah, it's kind of has some of the gorier side of it's fantasy, but with an edge. Grimdark.
Cool. That sounds rad.
And Epic just did a Prince of Thorns review on his channel, so if you want to check that out, I'll link it to you
Sure.
here in a few. With all the distractions that we have in modern life with social media and everything else around us, what do you do to stay focused when you're writing a book or when you're on a project?
Oh man, that's a very good question. It's definitely an ongoing challenge, especially because like when I have work out there, I want to do my very best to promote and spread the word, and also to help boost the signals of other writers and artists to the best of my ability. But I feel like it's a constant process trying to find that balance, because I think social media I've definitely gained a lot of positive things from it, but I would also characterize it as a necessary evil. And I do mean evil. I think, it's not great for our cognition and focus, and mental health. So I don't know. That's always something I'm trying to regulate. When I'm really focused, I'll try to set aside like maybe an hour a day where I allow myself to use social media, but I'm still figuring it out. If anyone has any tips, let me know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Something that I think everyone struggles with, to find that balance between, and when is enough.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
As far as writing goes, do you have any scenes that are your favorite to write? Like the scenes that you really enjoy writing?
Scenes that are my favorite to write. I tend to enjoy scenes that are like intensely visual. So my stories that veer into like psychedelic or cosmic terrain, I like to explore that stuff and to paint vivid images with language, to the best of my ability. That tends to be where I have the most fun, and where I lose myself the most. So there are certain sequences in a story from Darkest Hours called A New Kind of Drug that comes to mind. Yeah, that was a lot of fun to write.
That's probably my favorite story from that one.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, that's one of the ones I'm most pleased with too.
Yeah.
And the films in the auteur as well. That was I had a lot of fun exploring that too.
Yeah. I think it's interesting that you enjoy writing the visual scenes and you're a big movie buff, so you kind of see that connection there.
Definitely.
Yeah. And Epic Tales has a question: what is his writing process like? I imagine that he locks himself in a dark room and lets go. Maybe I'm just projecting.
It's sort of like that, I guess. I don't have any locks in my apartment, though. It's all sliding doors. It's a fairly small apartment, so the sliding doors help save space. But I don't do anything particularly interesting for my process. I wish I could, in all honesty, say that I, like drink blood out of a skull beforehand, or that I invoke some demon or something. But the truth is a lot less interesting. I sit at my laptop. I usually play music, either really loud music or really quiet music. So like death metal or black metal, where the lyrics are unintelligible, or ambient music like Brian Eno or Harold Budd. And I write. And sometimes I will have coffee or tea, always water. And that's it, man. I'm sorry that's a boring answer, but I just hit the keys with my fingers, and stuff eventually happens.
I thought all authors drink blood out of skulls and things like that. That was just the thing you guys all do.
Yeah, I think I'm the boring one. I think most other writers do. Maybe that's what I need to do to join the cool kids club. But I don't have a good working order skull. So again, if anyone has any recommendations as to where I can find like a really good, reliable skull to drink out of, that would be appreciated. Yeah.
And Epic Tales asks, no heavy metal?
Oh, definitely heavy metal. Yeah. I don't know. Some of my favorite bands to write to would be like Obituary, Carcass, Bathory. Sometimes usually it's stuff like I like all kinds of heavy metal when I'm not writing, but when I'm writing, I prefer music where I can't make out the lyrics. But I am also a fan of, all the good stuff: Black Sabbath, Judas Priest, Dio, Motorhead, all the good shit.
Yeah. Do you ever mix it? And you said you listen to music at a lower volume. Do you change the type of genre of music when you're writing certain scenes?
Not necessarily. Usually I just put on an album, and it's usually just to kind of drown out the outside world, to drown out the sound of cars on the street and people screaming on the street and things like that. So yeah, I'll just play, either ambient music, drone music, or like I said, wall of noise kind of stuff.
Yeah. Unintelligible.
Yeah.
And you gained a fan. Epic is about to pre-order the
Thank you, Epic. I appreciate that very much. Thank you.
When you finish when you finish your process and you have the book written, how important is getting your book reviewed or edited by an editor? Do you do that? Is that part of the process that you take when you're finished writing your side?
Absolutely. Yeah. So before I even submit my fiction, I have a group of writer friends who I trust to go to as the term is beta readers, like your first reader. So I often go to two amazing local writers named Neil Howell and Randy Schroeder, very good friends of mine. My older brother, Daniel, is a very talented writer. He usually looks at my drafts. And I have a friend named Tom Hubschmidt who writes more, I guess you could say, like literary or non-genre fiction. So I try to get a number of different perspectives. Yeah, and then in terms of publication, there will usually be a house editor who will look at it. There's an amazing fellow at Journal Stone named Sean Leonard who has a really keen eye, and his edits are always very helpful. So definitely important. Yeah, editors are for the good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's, from the authors that I've all spoken to, I think their story and their experiences in getting their work published is so interesting to me. So when you first began writing and wanted to get your book published, what were your experiences getting your book out there?
Well, I started publishing short fiction just in like magazines and anthologies and things like that first. So I looked into what's the name of it? Dark markets. And there are a couple other online resources where you can find open markets. And I just started sending things out electronically. And then Shelter for the Damned, that was a long process. I initially wrote a draft of that novel in my early 20s and then reworked it quite dramatically for several years. And then it just took me a while to find the right home for it. But yeah, I keep another good thing social media is great for is finding and sharing open markets for fiction. So that's another way I find openings for my stuff.
And Stacy J is here. Glad she can make it.
Hi, Stacy.
Yeah. Let's see. When you finish writing a book, do you celebrate, or is there something you do to enjoy the moment when you're finished and when it's ready for publication?
I think maybe those are two different questions because I never feel like I'm finished a book until it has been accepted for publication. I do celebrate though when a book has been accepted for publication. Depending on where I'm at, I might go out for dinner or drink with someone special or have a mason jar of good scotch. Some humble, some humble form of celebration, but I do try to imbibe when the occasion calls for it. Yeah.
For the cover art on your books, how much control do you have or input do you have on the cover art for all of your books?
Journal Stone has been amazing on that front. Like for Shelter for the Damned, they asked if there were any artists I thought who would be good for it. And the name Trevor Henderson came immediately to mind. He's doing amazing work. And Trevor had actually very graciously shouted out Darkest Hours on social media not too long before Shelter was accepted. And they said, yeah, sure, Trevor's great. And then Trevor was also phenomenal to work with. He would send me sketches throughout the process, ask me for ideas. A lot of his original sketches were more of a kind of red and black palette, and they were gorgeous. But eventually I told him, like, I'm thinking something more like the palette of a haunted house attraction, the kind of bioluminescent and black light glow. And he did amazing things with it. So, and then for Darkest Hours, same thing. They said, like, do you have any ideas for it? And I said, I'm envisioning a pentagram made out of tentacles in the style of a vintage horror movie poster. And they asked me, like, what font do you like? Do you have any reference images? So I sent them Some great art by some of the famous Lovecraft painters and some heavy metal album covers. And Mikio Murakami is amazing, and he ran with it, and I loved it. So yeah.
Oh. Yeah, the cover is very eye-catching. Both of Shelter in the Damn Darkest Hours were both they pop and they catch your eye.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, credit to those artists.
Let's see. Stacy has a question. Would you rather only ghostwrite for other people's stories or publish your own work unedited?
Oh man, this is a sadistic question.
She is
Stacy.
Watch out for Stacy.
Okay. Would I rather only ghostwrite other people's stories or publish my own work unedited? I'm going to say my answer is dependent on who I'm ghostwriting for. If I'm ghostwriting for somebody whose work pays the bills, hell yeah. If I'm ghostwriting for somebody and I'm making like no money off of it, hell no. In that case, I would just publish my own work unedited, because you're always going to cringe at your own work. Or maybe that's just me, but there's always going to be stuff about your own work that makes you cringe anyway. So say la vie. But yeah, so if it's for like a major writer where I'm getting paid a lot, I'd be up for that. Yeah.
Stacy with the tough questions.
That is a tough question. Thank you, Stacy.
Yeah. Are there any books that you started that when you initially read them, you didn't enjoy them, but came to grow to love them over time?
I mean, anytime I've written a novel, I go through periods where, like, you spend so much time with a novel. For me, I go through periods where I think, is this working? Or you question, like, is this too similar to X, Y, or Z? Have I been here before already? But yeah, by the time any of my work is published, I've grown to love it on some front, or I wouldn't put it out there in the world. But yeah, I think, going through the writing and revision process, I almost always have a stage or two where I think, is this working at all? So for me, that just comes with the territory. Yeah.
Were there any books that other people have written that you disliked initially and then came to really love them?
Maybe. Nothing comes immediately to mind, but maybe. I read Stephen King's novel Revival twice because I was considering writing an essay on it, and I liked it better the second time, but I already liked it the first time. So that's the only. I don't often reread books, so that could be part of the reason why. I usually don't read books more than once, unless I love them.
Yeah. And Epic asked, when did you first realize you wanted to be a writer? We kind of touched on that a little bit ago, but.
Yeah. Like I said, it's just some pathological distortion I was born with, I think. So I don't think I had a choice. It's just something I do. It's like, an ailment.
What have you learned about yourself during your writing career?
What have I learned about myself? I guess I've learned how to be resilient, how to be persistent. Because if there's anything that I think is required in order to have any success as a writer or a creative person, it is resilience, and it's a willingness to just stomach rejection after rejection. I think that's just part of the territory. It comes with it. So I've learned that I can do that and continue hacking away at it. And maybe I've learned how fucked up I can be, but that's something I think I already knew. So I was like, yeah, that maybe I knew that going in.
Yeah. Epic he's asking if there's any tips for an aspiring writer like him.
Yeah, for sure. I would say similar to what I just said, Epic, just don't give up. There will be lots of rejections. That's not a reflection on you or your work. If you get feedback with a rejection, take that feedback into consideration as best you can. If you know anybody close to you who you trust and who would be willing to do it, I do think having a beta reader or a first reader, as many as you can, is absolutely integral. And read a lot. And regardless of the genre you read within, try your very best to read across time periods, genres, points of view. Just devour as much material as you can. If you're a horror writer, I'd say, try not to read only horror. You want to read a lot of the genre that you work within because chances are you probably love that genre. If you don't, maybe not the best genre to work within, but yeah, balanced reading diet is good for you.
Yeah.
That's yeah.
So speaking of rejection and negative feedback, with social media and everything else we have around us all the time now, what is it like dealing with negative feedback, whether it's valid or not? How do you deal with that? Because people can be nasty.
People can be nasty. This is true. I mean, for the most part, people have been remarkably merciful on me with my work. Most of the feedback has been pretty kind. But yeah, the negative reviews are out there. I don't know. That's an ongoing process too, figuring out what to do with that. I think the best thing to do is to try to remember that this is ultimately just someone's opinion. But the brain has this funny thing it does, where if you have 99 positive reviews and one negative review, your eyeballs are going to zoom in onto the one negative review, and just ignore all the positive. That's definitely something I do. I don't know. Do as I say, don't do as I do. I don't know. I'm working on it. I'm trying to learn how to deal with that stuff better.
I think it's an ongoing process, right?
Yeah, for sure. For sure it is.
So speaking of finding that balance, how do you find the balance of writing what your readers want versus what you want to write? How do you balance that out?
I personally think you can't think about what readers want while you're writing. I don't think, for me anyway, I think the only way to move through a piece of fiction is to just zero in on it and focus on the work. You have to shut out all that other mental clutter. What would readers think? Would it be good for X market or Y market? Again, those kinds of questions like, have I been here before? Is this too similar to A book or B book? I think in order to efficiently move through a project, you have to shut all of that out. So I just try to zero in on the piece and let the piece walk me through wherever it wants to go. And then those questions come after, I suppose.
And Stacy has a comment. Great advice. I will add, don't start marketing your work. Don't be too shy to self-promote. I didn't know you had a story until you mentioned it in your video. Get the word out so you can get feedback.
Didn't know Epic had a story or I had a story.
I'm sorry, I misunderstood.
No problem. I don't know.
Yeah.
But in any event, self-promotion is good.
Yeah, definitely. How important is a social media following as trying to promote your work and trying to get it out there? Is it important to have that connection with your readers or with potential readers?
I think so. I have certainly, I don't know. I mean, I don't think I can pinpoint exactly where sales come from and things like that. But I mean, I enjoy engaging with readers and other fans of the genre and other writers. That's one really cool and great thing about social media. And I've made a lot of incredible connections through those platforms. So on that front, I think social media is really good. Like I said, I think it's important to monitor how and why I use social media just for my mental health. But it absolutely has its benefits for sure.
Yeah. Do you have a favorite? You mentioned that your parents encouraged reading and you read a lot as a child. Do you have a favorite childhood book?
Pet Sematary, which I read at age 12. That would be my favorite childhood book. Yeah.
Are you a big Stephen King fan?
Yeah, of course. Love Stephen King. Yeah. Absolutely. One of the best.
And Epic Tales is learning.
Oh, thank you, Epic. Happy to hear it.
So my next question was going to be, if you could have dinner with any author, alive or dead, who would it be and what would you ask them? But I think I might know who your answer is going to be.
Oh, man. Any author, alive or dead, and what would I ask them? Oh, man. I'm really thinking on this one. Sorry. I would actually, I would love to meet Virginia Woolf. I would love to meet Virginia Woolf and just ask her about her process, because I think her prose is transcendent and her books are transcendent. And she just was such a beautiful and special mind. So, yeah, Virginia Woolf. I don't know. Ask me tomorrow. I'll give you a different answer. But
Yeah, it's a tough one. And the Leslie from the Nerdy Narrative mentioned that's a hell of a book for 12.
Yeah, I mean, I think I was 12. I remember I was serving an in-school suspension, and I was spending a lot of time in the principal's office, and it was boring and I couldn't interact with the other kids. And I snuck a copy of Pet Sematary and I had it like hidden inside my science textbook, and it just transported me into this other world. So now it has a special place in my heart. It got me through that time.
Should we ask why you were there? Or?
It was cumulative. It was a series of offenses. I was just a wild kid.
Yeah.
So it was a series of offenses. It was like a final straw kind of thing. Yeah.
Paying the cost, huh?
Yeah.
Epic has another question. If you could list out the elements that every good story has, what would that list look like?
Very good question, Epic. For me as a reader, what I value and seek out most in fiction is a distinct style and a point of view, an authentic point of view. And that's not necessarily something you can learn. Some people might argue that you can. And I think you can pick up residue of other writers that speak to you and kind of consolidate that into a style. But that's usually something I either connect with it or I don't. I see like, this is a unique point of view. This is a style I haven't encountered before. And that's what tends to draw me in first. Other than that, an efficient prose style. You have to be able to write a sentence. That's a big one. And other than that, it's fair game. I mean, yeah, you have to be able to write a sentence. And I really, for me, more than anything, more than genre, more than the content of a story, more than character, more than anything, is the point of view like real? Is this real, and is it distinct? Because if you're coming at it from a real place, I think that's where exciting and electric fiction comes from. That's just my point of view.
It's a good question and a good answer.
Thank you. Yeah, great question, Epic. Thank you.
That was a really good one. Do you believe in writer's block?
Yeah, I do, because I've encountered writer's block. Yeah, writer's block is, some writers say it's not real or whatever. Maybe for them it's not. I don't think that's something that can be applied to every writer. Sometimes it can be circumstance or mental health or whatever can just get in the way of your productivity. I think the best solution is to try your best to continue reading. Don't beat yourself up. Allow your process to be what your process is. And yeah, for me, I think when I'm at my most productive is when I'm most regimented as a writer. So I've gone through periods where I'll write for an hour at the same time every morning, or 2 hours at the same time every morning. And that tends to help me stay on track as a writer. But I've also encountered periods where it's just not coming. So, yeah.
And Stacy mentioned Pet Sematary scared the crap out of her. I stopped reading for a while after that book. I stopped reading Stephen King for a while after that book. I was 11 at the time.
a fellow horror maniac. Very good.
Yeah. And Kayla Lenzen is here. She recently did a review, or she recently read Darkest Hours as well.
Yes, thank you, Kayla. That was a great. I really appreciated that. I checked out that video. Thank you.
And she does some really great reviews. Kayla has some really awesome reviews.
Fantastic.
Epic has a question. How has your prose developed from your first book? How did you develop it? Was it a conscious or an unconscious process?
So I actually wrote Shelter for the Damned before anything in Darkest Hours. Yeah, and for me, my prose style like definitely arises from my influences to some extent. So for me, that process of exploration through reading is very instrumental in terms of developing style. So, like I said, when I first encountered King, that was a really electric and exciting moment. When I first encountered Hubert Selby Jr., that was a really deep connection. Jim Thompson was another one. Virginia Woolf, as I mentioned, Edgar Allan Poe, H.P. Lovecraft, Herman Melville. So when I encounter a writer who really excites me, I just devour as much of their work as I can. And I find when I have that sort of relationship as a reader, that enthusiastic, alive relationship with a text, that tends to find its way into my writing. So I really think it's just a matter of staying active and curious as a reader. And yeah, I don't know if that answers your question, Epic, but yeah, if you have any follow-up questions, I can try and answer. But
And you did mention the importance of having beta readers or someone to look over your work.
Yes.
How do you choose those people? How do you decide who should read? Who should be a beta reader? What type of feedback you're looking for? How do you decide on beta readers?
So how I decide on beta readers is there are people I'm close with whose work I've read, and I admire and respect their work. So I trust their input. So I mentioned Tom Hubschmid, Neil Howell, Randy Schroeder, and my brother Dan. Those are all very skilled writers. And I'm close enough with them where I don't feel too guilty asking that, because it's a big commitment to look at someone's work. So I wouldn't just ask a stranger personally. And in terms of the types of feedback I'm looking for, it varies from piece to piece. Sometimes I'll say, I feel like this ending isn't quite having the impact I want, or I feel like X scene and Y scene aren't connecting in the way I'd like, or I feel like Z characters' motivations are unclear. So it might depend on the story, or sometimes I'll just send it and say, let me know what you think. Is there anything you'd recommend changing? So yeah, that varies. And like I said, I like having a variety of writers too. So Neil Howell writes crime fiction. Randy Schroeder writes kind of experimental, psychedelic, punk adventure fiction. It's very unique. Tom writes character-focused literary fiction, and my brother writes a mixture of dark, realist fiction and some horror stuff as well. So I just try to get as many different POVs as I can.
And Leslie from the Nerdy Narrative commented, I was late joining, so I apologize if someone asked. But Mike, would you please give us another Shack story? I would love an origin story for the Shack. Hal, I'd love a follow-up too.
Interesting. I'll think about it. Thank you. I appreciate it. Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of stuff on the periphery of that narrative. The way I'm dealing with the Shack's mythology and backstory in the film treatment is a little different from the novel, and I kind of go into a little bit more detail there. In terms of another novel or story dealing with the Shack, that could be fun. I hadn't thought about it. If I can't promise anything, but I appreciate it. I appreciate it. Thank you, and thanks for reading.
And Kayla Lenzen did mention it was definitely worth the 5 stars.
Oh, thank you so much. I appreciate that.
And Leslie had another comment. The prose for Shelter for the Damned is my favorite thing about it. Loved the almost controversial conversational way, sorry, of storytelling and how it was presented.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. That's an interesting case where one of the earliest drafts of the novel was written for an experimental literature seminar. So I actually wrote the entire novel like a prose poem with no punctuation aside from the occasional slash and comma. I was too liberally influenced by Hubert Selby Jr., I think. But I also had these kind of concrete poetry sections where I would show the shack materializing out of slashes and commas. And obviously it has been dramatically reworked since then. I was reading a ton of Jim Thompson around the time I wrote that book. And I think his prose style, that kind of conversational style you're describing, I definitely owe a lot to Jim Thompson, the way he narrates his novels in alignment with his protagonists. So thank you, though. I appreciate that very much.
And we talked a little bit about, before we went live, about the pandemic and in the past year and a half or so. How has the pandemic and just life in general changed your approach to writing or the way that you approach certain stories? Because I think we all see those types of stories a lot differently now. Before, we kind of saw pandemic or those kind of stories as science fiction and never really thought, but now it was life for a long time and still is in some places of the world. So how has that changed your process?
I mean, I guess the most overt way it has affected my process is the first story in my forthcoming collection, Peel Back and See, which comes out from Journal Stone in October. It's called Havoc. And that story features a protagonist who's living in lockdown and who becomes obsessed with this very scary live feed on the internet. So that story actually peripherally addresses the current circumstances we're living within. And then I think it probably unconsciously informed some other stories I wrote during this period. I wrote a story called Offer to the Adversary, which will also be in Peel Back and See, and that's in a new anthology called Beyond the Book of Avon. That story features this art scholar who becomes obsessed with a painting by this famous occultist artist, and she becomes, I don't want to spoil anything, but I guess I'm dealing a lot with screens and surfaces and people being absorbed into screens and surfaces. And I think that probably has something to do with the fact that I've been living in a screen mostly for, over a year now. So, yeah.
I think it's so fascinating the way that we see those types of stories now, and because everyone ran out and was watching, forget the movie, with Matt Damon in it, the
Contagion. Yeah.
Everyone was watching that at the beginning when it all started, and we all viewed it a little differently when it was live. Yeah. Really interesting. Do you write or do you enjoy any other types of art other than, I know that you're into movies and music and books, but do you ever paint or draw or do anything like that?
I drew a lot as a kid. It's not something I've kept up, but I used to, come up with creatures and other planets and worlds and stuff like that. I wrote a very unreadable book in my youth called, I was probably like 10 or something. It was called Long Ago, and it ripped off Star Wars and Lord of the Rings in equal measures. So things like that really excited me. But yeah, I love visual art too. Like many fans of horror and dark art, I'm a big fan of Bacon. And I mean, in pre-pandemic times, I loved to go to the art museum, but that's something I haven't done in a long time. But music, cinema, I like it all. Yeah.
I noticed recently you post a lot on Twitter about movies and things, and I noticed you posted a lot about Nicolas Cage lately.
Mm-hmm.
So tell me about Nicolas Cage. What's it seems like you're a fan of his.
Huge fan. Yeah. I just think like his approach to acting is really radical, malleable, versatile, and the way he inhabits his roles often shifts the entire film in really fascinating ways. And I like the way he's he's inhabited so many different genres and performance styles. So he can do this very understated naturalist style, which he does in things like The Weatherman and Wind Talkers. But he can also do this kind of Baroque expressionist style in films like Deadfall and Color Out of Space. And just like the roles that he chooses and the films that he chooses tend to interest me too. So I just think he's one of the best living and I love listening to interviews with him too. He's very thoughtful and deliberate about his craft. He's probably the most interesting actor to listen to speak about the practice of acting, the craft of acting.
One of his movies that I think it was late 90s, maybe early 2000s was 8mm.
Yeah.
And that movie has really stuck with me for a long time. And I think that movie kind of got forgotten over the years, but it was pretty impactful for me anyway. I saw it a few times in the theater because I enjoyed it.
I like that one too. Yeah, good cast too. It's got Joaquin Phoenix, James Gandolfini. Yeah, that's a good film.
That's right. I forgot he was in that too.
Yeah.
Are there any TV shows or TV series that you're enjoying?
I am a terrible TV viewer. It often takes me like years to finish a show. During the pandemic, I watched all of The Sopranos, which I had somehow never seen. And I thought that was an amazing feat of writing and acting. And I mean, it's been talked about enough, but The Sopranos is great. And I like the original Star Trek a lot. I like the original Twilight Zone, Goosebumps, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Angel. I'm behind the times. I don't know what's going on in current television, but I like all those shows a lot.
Yeah. We and Leslie mentioned she has to run, but Mike, love your work. Got Darkest Hours Expanded Edition pre-ordered. Looking forward to digging into it.
Thank you so much, Leslie. I really appreciate the support. Thank you.
Leslie's great.
Yeah, she's awesome.
Yeah, we recently watched or rewatched Dark on Netflix. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it.
Mm-hmm.
It's like a science fiction, maybe horror, but we would watch each season and come back and talk about it. So I was curious if you were watching a series like that because some elements of horror in it, I guess.
Oh, cool. Yeah, no, I tend to spend most of my viewing time on movies. I should get better at keeping up with TV, but what can you do? There's only so much time, right?
Yeah, there's only so much time.
Yeah.
So you watched The Sopranos for the first time?
Yeah. Have you seen that?
Yeah, I've seen it probably 3 times over.
Oh, I can see
it. Yeah.
It's so good.
Yeah. I think it's interesting the way that some of the characters, I don't know if it's, but these characters are a major part of the story, and then they get killed or whatever happens to them, and everyone just kind of keeps going with their lives.
Yeah,
that happens.
Yeah, exactly. That's the world they inhabit, I guess. But yeah, that's just the level of performance and the consistency, the consistently high quality of the writing. It's like it's such an epic, amazing piece of art. I loved it.
Yeah, and some really great performances in that one too. I believe Edie Falco was really great in that.
Phenomenal.
Yeah, really great in that one.
Yeah.
Let's see. My questions are scattered here.
No problem.
And you already mentioned some of your favorite movie directors. So I actually need your help for something.
Okay.
Because we have a movie of the month we're starting, actually this month.
Okay.
And my month is October, and since it's in October, I have to pick. I'm going to pick a horror movie for our little group to watch, and then we're going to come and have a stream and talk about the movie. So, being a horror movie buff, I wanted to ask you for suggestions for a horror movie for people who don't usually watch horror. So I don't want to, not like the Human Centipede or anything, but something that'll be impactful but not too far. So, I wanted to get your thoughts on that.
For people who don't usually watch horror, you said?
Yeah.
Okay. Let's think here. I mean, they might seem like really obvious choices, but I think like some of the best films for like foundation of modern horror cinema, like the 1931 Dracula and Frankenstein. Psycho is that's like where the slasher genre emerges from. John Carpenter's Halloween. I mean, if you want to really disturb people, The Exorcist. That was one of the first horror films I ever saw.
Yeah.
It's it's intense though. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, also intense, but what were you thinking? Any titles that you had in mind?
I was thinking something like Hereditary was a kind of something not too far out, but enough to freak people out a little bit that aren't used to horror movies.
Yeah, a little more recent too.
But I thought you'd have some good class, like Dracula. I didn't think about that. Some good classics that would work.
Yeah, those are such watershed movies. Yeah, so good. I did really like Color Out of Space as far as recent horror films go. It's kind of out there. And the film Cam is really good too. That's on Netflix.
Is that Cam? Is that a foreign language film?
No, it's an American movie. It's about a cam girl who develops this kind of insidious online doppelganger. It's so well written, and the lead performance is like mind-blowingly good. So I like that one a lot too.
Wow.
Yeah.
Check into those. Any other movies you've seen lately or some modern movies that you've really enjoyed, like Cam and Color of Space or Out of Space?
Yeah, I saw one from 2018 called Look Away. That didn't. I from what I saw, the reviews were kind of divided, but I thought it was a really interesting, again, a kind of doppelganger narrative, a very dark coming of age movie. It also dipped its toes into like psychosexual body horror in ways that I thought were pretty bold. I dug that. And I saw a Mexican film called We Are the Flesh. That, again, I would not recommend this to newcomers to the genre, but I thought there were some interesting things in that. A Chinese film from 2004 called Abnormal Beauty. That was really cool too. Some that come to mind.
When you mentioned body horror, I thought of I believe the name is American Mary. I don't know if you've seen that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have. Yeah. It's been a while, but yeah, I love Catherine Isabel. She's great.
And you also mentioned the John Carpenter's Halloween. What did you think of the Rob Zombie remakes?
I love them. Love them. I think I can understand why fans of the original take issues with Rob Zombie's, because Carpenter's film, I think, is seen as like a sacred text, and he fucked with it. But I think if you look at Rob Zombie's films on their own terms as explorations of like American obsessions with serial killers and the psychological and social factors that contribute to the development of someone who develops like violent tendencies, there's so much there. There's actually a dialogue between me and a critic named Nadine Smith, who's written a lot of great criticism. She and I go really in depth into Rob Zombie's Halloween films in the Darkest Hours Expanded Edition. So, so love them. I know they're controversial, but I'm a big fan. What do you think of them?
I enjoy them. I thought it was I like when they take chances and don't do something. They don't just remake it, point by point. So I appreciate the fact that he just went for it and did his thing, and didn't try and change course or compromise. It seems like he did what he wanted to do and didn't change too much. So I can appreciate that. And it's strange because with him being a musician, he's so visual in his movies. A lot of visual. They're very striking. So that's what kind of totally surprises me about his movies.
Yeah, he's definitely one of my biggest inspirations. And I mean, again, around the age of 12 or whatever, I had a copy of Hellbilly Deluxe on steady rotation in my Discman. And I had a really cool junior high teacher who said, like, if you like Rob Zombie and Marilyn Manson and all these other artists I was listening to as a kid, he's like, you should check out Alice Cooper. And now Alice Cooper is like my favorite. And I think Zombie takes a lot of a lot of what he does as a musician in terms of bringing together rock and theatrical performance and horror imagery from Alice Cooper. But yeah, his stage. Have you seen him live before? His stage shows are incredible.
I did. I saw him. It's been a long time, but I saw him with, I believe it was Godsmack. Was it? I think it was Godsmack, Deftone. It was a crazy lineup.
Cool.
And it was way back, and it was a long time ago. But I was surprised how little he was. I didn't recognize him because he's when they're on stage, they seem larger than life, and they seem like these towering figures. And then you see them in real life, and they're little, little people. So
and the show is so huge.
Yeah. That's interesting. What is your take on rock music these days? With it seems like rock has kind of taken, I think, probably more mainstream rock. I think most people would call something like the Foo Fighters rock now, when before it would be on the lighter side.
Yeah.
Seems like there's the heavier stuff, and then there's nothing really in the middle. Mainstream, anyway.
Yeah, no, in terms of the presence of rock music in our culture has shifted. But I think in terms of any artist having the kind of impact that a band like, say, the Beatles or even Nirvana would have had during their era, I just don't think it's possible because of the way we consume music now and the way music is proliferated and distributed. There just isn't really that concentrated distribution in the same way there was prior to streaming and downloading and stuff like that. But yeah, I can't even think of any current mainstream rock bands who I listen to, really. I really can't. I guess Rob Zombie is a mainstream rock musician, right? I listen to his. So. Yeah, and Alice Cooper. But they're like older. I can't think of any new. Like, I can't think of any band that started after, let's say, the 90s in the genre who I listen to.
Yeah.
I don't know. But that's an interesting question.
Okay. And to your point about the way we consume music now, I remember they used to construct albums in a certain way that the order the songs were in and all of that was like it was art, the way that they structured it. And now it's just you buy a song and it's on its own. So I'm gonna go yell at the kids to get off my lawn after this, but I miss having that kind of structure and listening to an album from start to finish, and having some kind of meaning to it. So it's a big change.
For sure. Yeah, no, I feel you. I think there are some artists still paying mind to that, but yeah, you're right. It's everything. Our relationship to music and the distribution of music and the design of albums, even the concept of the album is a lot different now. Although, like, we're still in the midst of that, the vinyl resurgence. So I think to some extent that's the album concept still floating around, but yeah.
I hope so. There's some hope with the vinyl resurgence.
Yeah. No, I love. That's how I prefer to listen to music, is on vinyl too, for sure.
Yeah. It's weird. It's strange that it comes back. It seems like there's a big resurgence now, when before it was a little bit. So it gives me some hope knowing that people still enjoy physical media.
Definitely. Yeah.
Old fashioned, I guess. But thanks for coming by. It's been a blast talking, and the hour and almost a half flew by. So,
oh wow.
Yeah. So I don't know if anyone in the comments has any questions, but get them in if you can. But thanks for stopping by. It's been a lot of fun. I know we've been talking about it for a while, so we're finally here and finally get a chance to chat.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me on, Steve. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, this is probably one of my favorite things to do on YouTube, is just conversation. So it's a blast.
Absolutely, I really enjoyed it. Yeah, thank you so much.
And so it sounds like Epic learned a few things. So you helped him out with his writing.
Oh, that's great. Thanks so much, Epic. Thanks for listening in. Thanks for the support.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, Epic is a really nice guy. Yeah, and I'll send you his review of Prince of Thorns, and be curious what you think of Grimdark. I think there's some elements that are in that genre that I think you might gravitate towards.
Cool. I'll check it out. Thank you, James. I appreciate it. Thanks for listening.
Thanks, James, for watching and commenting. Cool. Well, Mike, it's been fun. Thank you for stopping by. It's been a blast.
Thank you likewise, bro. Yeah. Appreciate it.
Thanks everyone for asking questions and participating. It's been a lot of fun.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it. Stay spooky. Stay safe.